Good morning, everyone. Let me begin by welcoming our witness, no stranger in this room, Dr. Michal Friedhoff, and thanking you, Michal, for joining us today for an important hearing. Michal, we're pleased to welcome you back before the EPW committee as the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. As we gather here today, and I believe today is the actually 6th anniversary of the enactment of Toxic Substance Control Act legislation, and among others, Senator Inhofe, myself, and just a lot of folks worked on, David Vitter, Tom Udall, I mean, just all kinds of people who worked on it. It's a great bipartisan triumph at the time. As we gather here today, my hope is that this hearing will offer us a much needed and timely opportunity to explore one of the more daunting challenges that we face, and that is protecting our health and the health of our families, while also preserving the capacity of chemistry to enrich our lives and spur innovation. Given the complexities of this task and the intricacies of the science that accompanies it, not just anyone can do that. It should come as no surprise that the miracle of modern chemistry comes with potential risks and rewards. In many cases, industry has invested large amounts of resources and expertise to develop the chemicals that surround us in our everyday lives and make our lives better. Having said that, they are not the ones we expect to tell us all we need to know about the potential shortcomings or negative health impacts that those chemicals can pose. So we turn, as we often do, to our government to serve as our watchdog and our protector of our people. In this case, it's the EPA. And through the Toxic Substance Control Act, or Tosca as we affectionately call it, Congress has vested the responsibility of protecting Americans from chemicals that pose an unreasonable risk to us and our environment with the EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. With that being said, I'm not sure we found a person more qualified to lead that effort than the witness before us today. Dr. Friedhoff is a PhD chemist who has spent countless hours working with many of us to create a law that can actually provide the protections that Congress intended when Tosca was initially enacted in 1976. But fixing of the law is only half the story. The harder part is dealing with the complexities with the competing interests and daunting mechanics of implementing that law. Senator Inhofe, Senator Markey, and a number of our colleagues on both sides likely recall the high expectations that accompanied our shared sense of accomplishment and relief in enacting the Lautenberg Act in 2016. Still, no matter how capable the leadership at EPA is, the agency simply cannot meet these expectations without adequate support from Congress and from the administration. Implementing Tosca requires experts and financial resources to rigorously test literally thousands of chemicals, quickly turn around risk assessments and chemical reviews, and establish the protection against those chemicals that can put our lives and our livelihoods at risk. As Dr. Friedhoff will point out in her testimony today, EPA staff has continually faced the high expectations and workloads that we created in 2016, armed with flat budgets. But to be fair, this is a shared responsibility. Faced with the previous administration's efforts to strip the agency of critical personnel and resources, we in Congress did not respond by providing EPA with the budget increases that this law requires. To put it frankly, we collectively dropped the ball. Not surprisingly, today the agency is missing deadlines and delaying decisions, which contribute to growing grievances. Advocates are frustrated with EPA's delayed pace in reviewing and regulating harmful chemicals. And meanwhile, those in industries are disheartened by having to wait sometimes a year or more for new chemicals to be approved or not approved. It's clear that no one is happy with the current situation. This leaves advocates and companies feeling compelled to look for nefarious explanations for those unmet aspirations and expectations. Faulty science, regulatory overreach, skirting the law, and inappropriately close ties between EPA staff and industry. Fortunately, there is a fundamental solution to all of this. I'm going to say that again. Fortunately, there is a fundamental solution to all of this, and that is to provide the agency the resources it needs to get the job done, the job we all want them to do, the job that we all need for them to do. And we might be pleasantly surprised to see how much better both the law and EPA start to look if the Congress and the administration actually work together going forward to ensure that the agency has the qualified people on board with the resources needed to meet the letter of this new law. My suggestion is that we give them that chance. We need to do more. I've committed to working together with the members of this committee to ensure that we provide the agency with the resources they need in fiscal 2023, and to then hold the EPA accountable going forward in protecting us from harmful toxics while allowing chemistry to usher in a new world of clean energy and life-saving technologies. Dr. Friedoff, we look forward to hearing from you today, no small part because you have quite a tale to tell us. And before we hear from you, though, I want to hear from our ranking member, Senator Capito, for her opening remarks. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back to the committee, Dr. Friedoff. It's nice to have you here. Today, we're holding a hearing, as the chairman has said, on EPA's ongoing implementation of the Toxic Substance Control Act, Tosca. In 2016, Congress passed in a bipartisan way overhauled the Tosca program, strengthening EPA's authority to evaluate and regulate new and existing chemicals. These were significant, as you know, working them, a significant bipartisan achievement. Among other changes, the revised Tosca program established legally enforceable deadlines for EPA decisions. These deadlines are a key facet of the new Tosca, and one I'd like to particularly focus on today. The chairman's already talked a bit about this. Since being confirmed in your role, you have repeatedly stated, including in your testimony today, that a lack of resources is the reason EPA has repeatedly missed statutory deadlines. With regard to existing chemicals, you have said, quote, "It shouldn't come as a surprise that we expect to miss every single deadline for the final risk management rules for these first 10 evaluations and every single deadline for the next 20 risk evaluations." Well, I have to be clear here, it does come as a bit of a surprise to hear a blanket pronouncement such as this. In particular, when EPA's appropriations have been received over the past few years have been developed in a bipartisan way. You have blamed the root cause of Tosca's delay on the prior administration gutting the program. But we're 18 months into the Biden administration. Compared to 2016, you have dozens more full-time equivalent employees working within the Tosca program, and user fees have risen by over 600%. In 2021, EPA issued 146 final determinations on new chemical submissions, fewer than any other year of the prior administration. The Obama administration, which was tasked with standing up the entire new Tosca program, issued 92 determinations from June 23, 2016 until the end of its final year. In contrast, as of last month, your office has issued final determinations only 23 times for 2022 submissions over a comparable amount of time. And that's really the crux of the issue that we'll be talking about today. Previous administrations were able to do more with fewer resources, and I guess the question would be, why is that? It seems that internal changes pushed by the administration to the Tosca program are undermining EPA's ability to meet its statutory obligation. 10 risk evaluations finalized between June 2020 and January 2021 have all now been reopened, adding to a more supposedly already overstretched staff's plate. According to your previous statements, impacted communities will now have to wait to at least 2025 to see an eventual risk management rule for these high-priority chemical substances. In your request for more robust funding to the Tosca program, you continually point to the increased workload that your office is facing. It kind of seems to me that a lot of the workload is self-generated mission creep of the Tosca program that's not required by the statute. Under the Biden EPA, risk evaluations must now include exposure pathways covered by other EPA-administered statutes like the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, as well as assess fence line community exposure. Your office has revised risk evaluation models to make highly questionable assumptions that OSHA standards are insufficient and that workers are not routinely wearing PPE. Finally, the agency is no longer issuing risk findings for individual conditions of use, but is adopting a whole chemical approach. Taken together, these policy changes have created a situation where existing chemicals under review will most certainly face an unreasonable risk determination going forward. So this expansion of your office's works beyond what Tosca requires has exacerbated the workload issues and is at odds with the intent of the statute. In addition, it seems staff resources have been diverted to programs without existing authorizations, like IRIS and Safer Choice, with EPA prioritizing elective programs over statutorily authorized programs. I don't have to tell you this, but in today's turbulent economic times, the importance of reliable, efficient domestic supply chains for key technologies like semiconductors and batteries has become increasingly apparent. Even food stocks essential for the Biden administration's renewable energy priorities like batteries and solar panels are being held in regulatory limbo. Delays in approving new chemical submissions directly impact our economic and national security and ultimately will help fuel inflation and scarcity. We can all agree that everybody will benefit from getting this TSCA implementation on track. I look forward to hearing what specific actions you plan to take administratively beyond just asking for additional resources to fulfill the office's statutory obligations in a timely and cost-effective manner. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Capito. And we now turn to our witness, Dr. Friedhoff. We welcome Mihal, who is currently serving as the Assistant Administrator of the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention at the Environmental Protection Agency. Prior to her confirmation in that position in June of 2021, she joined EPA as a Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention in January 2021, right after the inauguration of the President. Dr. Friedhoff has more than 20 years of government experience, most recently as the Minority Director of Oversight for this committee. She began her congressional service in 1996, and then Congressman Ed Markey's office as Congressional Science and Engineering Fellow after receiving a PhD in physical chemistry at the University of Rochester. Dr. Friedhoff has also served on the staffs of the House Science Committee, the House Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming, the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and the House Natural Resources Committee. With environmental expertise spanning a range of policy areas, her legislative work includes the 2016 reauthorization of Tosca, 2019 legislation to address Pfas contamination, fuel economy provisions in the 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act, and a law requiring the creation of an online database of potential consumer product safety defects. And somehow, in the midst of all that, colleagues, she managed to bring four babies into the world and raise them, and 4 children that any of us would be pride to claim as our own. When she worked as a member of our team here on this committee, I used to say that she never slept, and my guess she probably doesn't sleep now. I don't know how you do it all, but we're here to figure out how we can enable you and the folks that you lead do your jobs even better today. With that, your statement will be entered for the record, and then we'll start some questions. Thank you. Please proceed. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Carper, Senator Inhofe, Ranking Member Capito, and other members of the committee. Thanks for inviting me to testify on EPA's implementation of the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA. It was exactly 6 years ago that many of us gathered at the White House to witness the historic amendments to TSCA being signed into law. For nearly 40 years, TSCA had largely failed to serve its purpose, to protect people and the environment from the risks of dangerous chemicals. I was proud to be a part of that bipartisan group that negotiated the Lautenberg Act. I was also proud, a few months ago, to propose the rule to ban the ongoing uses of chrysotile asbestos, more than 30 years after the previous failed attempt became the emblem for why we needed to rewrite the law. Unfortunately, on amended TSCA's 6th birthday, I think we can all also agree that things aren't yet working as everyone had hoped. Despite the best efforts of our dedicated staff, we're missing many of our statutory deadlines. Our scientific peer reviewers and the courts have been critical of our work, and the public lacks confidence in our chemical safety efforts to date. Having the public's trust is essential to realize the promise of TSCA reform. It's in everyone's interest for the public to be able to trust EPA when it says that a chemical that the industry makes and sells is safe, or when EPA writes a rule to say how that chemical can be safely used. For the entire 6 years since the law was enacted, the agency has faced some major challenges, and central to all of them was a lack of resources. The 2016 Tosca amendments told EPA in no uncertain terms to scale up. The program's workload skyrocketed virtually overnight and doubled again several years later. But in the law's first 4 years, EPA never once made a congressional budget request for new resources to implement the new work. And as a result, budgets for the new law remain just about exactly the same as the budget for the old broken law. And although the new law gave EPA the authority to collect fees from chemical companies, we've only collected about half as much as Congress intended. The President's fiscal year 2022 budget request was the very first one that requested additional Tosca funding, but the agency didn't receive everything we asked for. In our 2023 budget request, we've asked for an increase of almost $64 million and 201 FTE for the Tosca program, and that's based on an extensive analysis of how much the law will actually cost to implement the way Congress expected it to be implemented. We'll also update the fees rule and are doing all that we can to increase efficiencies and improve our processes. But the truth is, the years of compounding budget and workload challenges have taken their toll. The last administration missed the deadlines for 9 of the first 10 risk evaluations, and for just about the entirety of the new law's existence, we've struggled to complete new chemical reviews as quickly as Congress intended. It's simple elementary school math. We won't do more with less. We'll do less with less. For instance, we're working as quickly as we can to put measures in place to protect people from exposures to dangerous chemicals like trichloroethylene, methylene chloride, and asbestos. The deadlines for those final rules on those first 10 chemicals are in just a few months, and we won't make a single one of them. Without additional resources, we won't get more than a handful of those rules on the books before 2025 or beyond. We're conducting about 24 risk evaluations with statutory deadlines that start to hit later this year. Absent the resources in the President's budget, it's unclear whether we'll even be able to complete half of them before 2025. There'll be real consequences if we don't get these resources. Communities, workers, children, all of us, really, will go even longer without the health protections we need and deserve. Congress also wanted our new chemicals reviews to be both protective and fast. But our budget for new chemicals now is actually less than it was before the new law, because about 15% of the new chemical staff were permanently moved by the previous administration to work on risk evaluations. With more work and less staff, we'll continue to fall short of Congress's expectations. But it's also very clear to me that added resources are not just about meeting deadlines. Resources will also let us build the infrastructure of a well-run, sustainable program. We're focused not just on getting the chemicals reviewed and the rules written, but on ways to build that infrastructure, maximizing use of the scientists and the resources we do have. And because science is the backbone of everything we do at EPA, we're reaffirming our commitment to scientific integrity across the board. The path forward's clear. We need to implement the law that Congress wrote. And to do that, we need to build a foundation for a sustainable program, one that delivers the promised health and environmental protections, one that brings the predictability that stakeholders expected it to bring, and one that can endure for years to come. I'm confident that with sufficient resources, the law can and will deliver on those promises. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for that testimony. And I'll start off and then yield to Senator Capito and Senator Inhofe and others who join us. You may not be surprised to know that we've heard from many chemical companies that the new chemical review process at EPA has essentially stalled. The goal to complete these reviews under the Lautenberg Act amendments to Tosca, as you know, was 90 days. With the resources you have, how long is it taking to complete these reviews?
Well, thanks very much for that question. And the answer is it depends on the chemical, because some are more complicated than others to review. But I would say that for the entirety of the last 6 years, the agency has had typically 200 to 300 new chemical submittals that are waiting for agency action. And our backlog, so to speak, is the same as it has been for just about the last 5 years.
All right. with the resources, if Congress, let's go, if the Congress provided the full $64 million boost requested in fiscal year 2023 for our chemical programs, would that enable you and your team to meet this target?
I think it would sure help a lot. I mean, the truth is that the new chemicals program is even more challenged than the rest of Tosca. Before the law was changed, EPA only had to do reviews on about 20% of new chemicals that came into the agency. And after the law was changed, EPA had to do 100%. And not only did the last administration fail to ask for any more money to complete what is about 5 times the amount of work, they actually cut the new chemicals budget by about 15% by moving the staff over to work on existing chemical risk evaluations instead. So that's why we're operating with less than 50% of what we think we need to review chemicals both quickly and protectively. It's why we only have 2 human health assessors to review the hundreds of new chemical submittals that come every year. And it's why we will continue to struggle with these new chemical reviews until we're able to get the toxicologists and other health experts that we need on board and trained and ready to do work.
All right. Is there anything that the chemical companies can do when they submit their applications that might help the process move more quickly?
Actually, there is, and I appreciate you asking that question, because I think a lot of times what happens is that companies don't give us all of their data up front, and so they'll give us something, say, 30 days in or 60 days in, and then we have to basically restart the clock and redo the risk assessment. And that doesn't just hold up the line for that particular company, it holds up the line for everybody else, because everybody's stuck behind them waiting for their work to be redone with the new information. So one thing that we're actually doing and are getting ready to announce in the coming days is we actually took a look at the types of data that companies weren't giving us up front and analyzed the reasons for delays in reviewing those companies' new chemical submittals. And we're going to do some pretty aggressive educational outreach to industry so that they can know what would help us get the work done more quickly.
Okay. I think we appreciate your candor with respect to the budget situation facing the Tosca program, or has faced the Tosca program. And we fully support getting the agency the resources that you need to properly implement this important piece of legislation to protect our communities against the risk from toxic chemicals. I have 2 questions, and I'm going to yield to Senator Capito, but would you just give us a sense of what EPA will and won't be able to do under Tosca if you do not get the additional money and people requested for fiscal 2023?
Absolutely. So it's important to remember, before the law was changed, EPA did 0 comprehensive risk evaluations under Tosca. And after the law was changed, EPA was on the clock to do 10, and then that doubled again to about 24 now. If we don't get the resources, we will not be able to do even half of those before 2025. Before the law was changed, EPA did 0 comprehensive rules on existing chemicals because of the failed asbestos ban. We're now writing 10 different rules. And without the additional resources that are in the president's budget request, we will only be able to get a handful of those on the books until 2025 or beyond. So with new chemicals, we will continue to occasionally be hindering innovation and preventing the chemicals that are needed to power the nation's semiconductor, biofuels, battery, and other sectors onto the market as quickly as industry expects and as quickly as the law says. So there are real consequences, not just to people's health because of the delays that will be put into place, or the delays but for protections to be put into place, but there will also be delays for industry for them to get their new chemicals to market.
Yeah. One last question, then I'll yield to Senator Capito. Will the funding and personnel included in the fiscal year 2023 budget take care of the entire program, or is this a down payment that's going to take several years to pay off?
I think it's like any business. We've had 6 years of budgets that were far too low. It is going to take time to dig out of that hole. And I do think that any large new venture requires a sustained level of resources and requires a sustained level of effort on the agency's part to increase its efficiencies and find ways to work smarter, not harder. And we're committed to doing our part of that as well.
Thank you so much. Senator Inhofe.
Okay. Mikhail, first of all, it's nice to see you again. It's kind of funny because we've always gotten along famously, in spite of the fact that we've disagreed probably on more things than we've agreed on. But on the other hand, it's worked very well. I remember, and it was called to our attention a few minutes ago by Senator Carper that I chaired this committee back during the time that we were really busy on the thing, and of course on the Lautenberg bill, another person that we were very fond of and worked very closely with. But we were able, in fact, when we'd have our meetings, the Republicans have had a meeting once a week, and it'd get around to me at that time. I think you were with Barbara Boxer at that time, and I commented to them. I said, now, from the committee that actually gets things done, that was us, and we did. And it was, in fact, you got along famously with Ryan Jackson, Alex Hergott, Dimitri, and all these people. I mean, they really felt a very close relationship with you. Now, we have some problems and I know, I have to say this, which will make it a lot easier than repeating it all. I think that Senator Capito came out, and I kind of agree with the comments that she made and the problems that we're having. I've talked also, as has the chairman, to areas where we are having problems. I had questions I was going to ask you, and I will do it knowing full well what the answers will be. One was, Dr. Friedhoff, do you agree that delays in the new chemical review process are hampering innovation and will contribute to supply chain constraints and inflationary pressures?
I do agree that delays in the new chemical review process are delaying the introduction of new chemicals into commerce, but I'm not sure I fully understand how a chemical that isn't yet in commerce could be causing supply chain problems. That said, we want to do better, and I'm committed to doing what Congress expected us to do, which was to review new chemicals protectively and quickly, and I think we do have to do both of those things. Speed is important, and we want to do better.
Well, yeah, and you, in your opening statement, you commented your frustration with not being able to get I think you only got 1 out of 10 of the list of 10 that were in there. And so do you believe that the system that we are using is the best system? There could be a frailty in that system that's causing some of the problems that you talk about that need heavier funding. Now, a lot of us believe that the EPA has had kind of the hog's end of the funding for a long period of time, and I know that you didn't agree with the previous president and with what he was trying to accomplish, but on the other hand, there has to be an answer, and right now, I don't know how you can just go to the funding and say that that's where the problem is going to be resolved. What things other than just the funding, what could be done better, more efficiently, to crank out more stuff than we are cranking out right now?
I appreciate you asking the question because you're absolutely right. It is incumbent on the agency to try to find ways to do things faster and better, and we are doing that. So one example in the new chemical space was our Biofuels Initiative, because we noticed we had several dozen biofuels applications in, and instead of treating them all as entirely new things and giving them to different members of the team, we actually created a dedicated team and streamlined the review of those submittals so that we could get them out more quickly. And now we're looking at different sectors as well, where we have a lot of applications for the same types of chemistries coming in, seeing if there's ways we can streamline, write down the process, and then the next risk assessor that sees a chemical like that doesn't have to start from scratch. We're building up our training. We are investing in the IT, the actual infrastructure of the agency, because one thing that has hindered the new chemicals program for years is basically crumbling information technology that crashes, in some cases for weeks at a time. And whenever that happens, the new chemical staff can't do any of their work. And so, we're actually investing some money in making sure that those systems are modernized. We're also trying to standardize our training, write down more of our standard operating procedures in a way that is easy for a new risk assessor to understand, and we're working with the Office of Research and Development to modernize our scientific approach to reviewing these new chemicals.
Mm-hmm. I had a question that was written down here. It's a complicated question, so I think I've chosen that to ask you so I can hear your complicated answer. How can you then justify regulations of chemical substances based solely on benefits to carbon dioxide and exhaust particulate matter emissions from the manufacturing of the substance rather than exposures to the chemical substance itself?
So the law tells us to do risk evaluations, to look at whether there's risk to human health or the environment from a chemical substance under the conditions of use. And the law doesn't say that it can only be some types of exposures or some types of uses. The law really pushed the agency to look comprehensively at the risk that a chemical substance posed.
Okay. Now, what I'm going to do, I do want to hear the questions and comments that will be made by Senator Capito. Now, as you might know, and you might not know, that I'm doing the defense authorization bill right now, and it's so that's what I'm holding up. But I just want to hear more about what kind of and try to analyze myself, knowing the successes that you and I and those of us here at this table have had in the past. So I can kind of think, try to analyze why we can't do a better job in terms of cranking out more stuff and getting it done. I am concerned what's going to happen to a lot of this stuff. Is it going to go overseas? And but because there are a lot of unhealthy results and the problems that we're having right now. So I thank you for that. And Senator Capito, I want to hear more of your comments too.
All right. Senator Capito, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry I missed your statement. I had to go over to Commerce, so it's just one of those days, which I'm sure you beyond many people would understand that. So obviously from my statement, it's clear that the data that the new determinations have slowed significantly. What steps are you taking to improve the pace at which these new chemical determinations are issued?
Appreciate the question, and it's certainly true that our new chemical reviews have been slow for more than 5 years, and we have just about the same number of chemicals that are waiting for EPA approval than has historically been the case over the past several years. I will note we also have 15% of a smaller staff because 15% of the new chemicals risk assessors were permanently moved into the existing chemicals risk evaluation division towards the end of the last administration. So from day one, we actually had less than what both the Obama administration and the Trump administration had for new chemical reviews. That said, I completely agree that EPA has responsibilities it's not just about asking Congress for money and continuing to do things the same way. And I 100% agree with you. So there's a number of things that we've done already. One is the Biofuels Initiative that we rolled out a couple of months ago, where we streamlined the review of those types of chemistries because we had several dozen different biofuels applications in front of the agency. And we realized that by creating a dedicated team where the same people were always reviewing that type of chemistry, and by streamlining the review of those chemicals, we could get more of them out the door more quickly than if we treated every one like its own new thing over and over again. And we'll be expanding that type of initiative into other sectors in the coming weeks and months. We're just trying to sort of narrow our focus there. I think one thing that we've noticed over the years is that companies often don't give us everything we need to do a risk assessment that they feel reflects the real world conditions.
Okay, so let me stop you right there, because isn't that on everybody's plate there? Why are they not giving you what you want? Are you telling them what you want in a timely manner so you can hit these deadlines?
So I think we're realizing that's part of the problem. The problem is us. I think that so we did an analysis of why we have to rework so many risk assessments. And it turns out that, what happens is sometimes after a couple of months, a company will come and say, oh, no, I'm not planning on releasing this to water, or, oh, I'm not making it this way, your risk assessment's wrong. And we'll say, okay, give us the data, but then we kind of have to start over again from scratch and redo the risk assessment. And that causes delays, not just for that company, but for all the companies waiting behind.
Right.
So what we're about to do is release the results of that analysis that kind of just, that lists and documents the type of information that will help us if we get it on day one. And we're going to do some pretty aggressive and proactive outreach to companies to make sure that they understand what our data needs are. And we're really hoping that that helps us work more quickly as well.
Well, I do know that you've had a lot of outreach to companies, and that there's a very open door there. So that's very much appreciated by everybody. So if you have a 15% smaller staff over the last year and a half, have you hired into those positions?
So the 2022 Appropriations Act gave us a modest number of new hires. I will say.
But can you not fill in the 15%?
We've only had that money for a couple of months because I think our
Right.
spend plan was only approved a couple months ago. So we're doing an aggressive recruitment strategy. We have either hired or selected or somewhere in the process about 3/4 of the people that the 22 appropriations law lets us hire. And I want to say to you, because it's true, rebuilding the new chemical staff is my #1 personnel priority, and there's not even a close second.
What kind of, well, let me skip to the, this is kind of my own personal bugaboo, and I think it's the work from home scenario. So EPA's YouTube channel on April 22nd had a YouTube that said EPA Future of Work, Tips and Tricks, and I've talked to the EPA administrator about this, returning to work. And you said in that, I'm so looking forward to meeting as many of you as I can. What does that mean? Have you not met them?
I hadn't met them in person.
Are they back now?
Many of them are back. Many of them are teleworking more than they did before. Some have applied to be permanently remote work. And I have to say, I think the entire country is reimagining the way its workforce is designed following COVID. I think the West Virginia State Legislature just wrote a report that sounds much like what EPA's experienced. And I think what they said was that telework has proven to be beneficial and productive as a routine part of conducting the business of the state. And it is beneficial. But
Yeah,
that said,
I'm not disputing telework, but if I had an organization that was falling way behind, I think I might be roping people back to the office and saying, look, it's not working this way. And I understand it's a capacity thing. And I'm not here to beat up on you. I want to help. I want to help the situation move it quicker like you do. But I did find that, when you have that lack of connection, there's also a lot of stories out there, the lack of connection in work or people doing other things at certain times of the day when you're principally, engaged is a problem. But you're right, that's a bigger problem than what's going on in your office.
But I agree with you. It's been great to meet my staff in person. There are intangible benefits associated with in-person meetings and just sort of walking down the hallway and seeing people. I've really enjoyed it.
I mean, I think, let me ask about PFAS really quickly, because I know you know a lot about this. There are several definitions, I guess, at EPA on PFAS. Do you think a clear and consistent definition would be useful for the EPA?
Thanks for that question. I do think so. So the definition that EPA used in its rule that Congress actually is requiring us to do to collect historic information about the way PFAS is made and used, that definition was first written by my office in 2006 for purposes of the Tosca New Chemicals Program. And we then proposed to use that definition in that rule, and after we proposed it, the OECD, an international organization, proposed a much broader definition. So we're now kind of looking at the public comments that we got on that rule, and we're looking to see, what a more robust definition might look like, and whether we should be adding additional PFAS to our original proposal for that rule.
I mean, I think uniformity obviously is easier, and if you're having issues with meeting deadlines and having clear roadmaps are always much more beneficial. But apparently, Rodica Fox, when she testified before the committee, said that EPA was not going to be developing a uniform definition. So I've go over my time, and I see we have some other members here, so I'll stop here, and maybe we can get back to this.
I wouldn't.
Go ahead.
Get 30 seconds here.
Sure.
So I think what OECD said was they created a really broad definition for PFAS, and then said that individual regulators might do different things. And so, for example, a definition that would work for the Water Office would properly be focused on PFAS that would be expected to be in water, whereas a definition that worked for the Tosca office might be one for PFAS that are expected to be manufactured and processed. So I do think there'll be some differences, but I think it's important to think about what we all mean when we say that something is or is not a PFAS.
We've been joined, I believe we've been joined by WebEx, Senator Padilla. Are you there, Alex?
Yes, I am.
All right, you're recognized for any questions or comments you have. Go ahead, please. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greetings from the Interim and Judiciary Committee. Double duty here. Dr. Friedhoff, I'd like to ask you a question about how the use of supercomputing and computational toxicology could assist your office with the assessment of new chemicals under Tosca. Existing programs, as you know, that address environmental risk and consumer product exposures rely on scientific data, but generating this data can often be slow, costly, and rely on animal testing. I believe we can improve this by using supercomputers to run models to better predict adverse health effects caused by chemicals and to identify safer chemicals before they are in use in manufacturing. I've been working to advance legislation to create a consortium referred to as SuperSafe, to be comprised of federal agencies, including EPA, HHS, and DOE, along with state agencies and academic and other research institutions with similar capabilities to supercomputing and machine learning to establish rapid approaches for large-scale identification of toxic substances and the development of safer alternatives. Now, this SuperSafe consortium would develop and validate computational toxicology methods to predict adverse health effects caused by toxic substances and identify the safer chemical alternatives for use before we have widespread chemical pollutions in air, water, land, and consumer products. So with that as a background, Dr. Friedhoff, how would a SuperSafe consortium assist the EPA in assessing new chemicals under Tosca, and would such a program be helpful to your efforts to review new chemicals and bolster the use of good science in EPA's decision-making?
Well, thanks very much for that question. I think the answer is pretty simple. We are excited by any new scientific tool that can speed up our reviews and help us meet our obligation to reduce the use of animal testing under Tosca. We've recently started a collaborative research project or research program with the Office of Research and Development, and we're doing making some similar efforts to try to modernize the models and the other scientific tools that we're using for new chemicals. And the project that you're describing, I think, would be a really good complement to that.
Yeah, I know it's getting a little technical on you, but that's what happens when you have some scientists and engineers in the Senate serving on this committee.
I hear you.
Just one follow up to the Super Safe Consortium concept. As you know, Tosca also requires that EPA reduce and replace the use of vertebrate animals in the testing of chemical substances to the extent that it's practicable and scientifically justified. So can you talk just for a minute on how a super safe consortium and the use of these computational tools and models help EPA meet these Tosca mandates?
I think it would be a huge help. I think we are working to develop similar models and tools to reduce the use of animals in the Tosca program, and any additional help we could get through the type of consortia that you're contemplating, I think would be very appreciated.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Look forward to following up with you on that. I do have other questions, but they seem to overlap with questions that have been raised by other members of the committee. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
All right, thanks, Senator Padilla. I think Senator Markey's next. I don't know that you've ever met Dr. Friedhoff, but does she look familiar? How many years did you work for her?
I worked for her for 16 years, and I think you worked for her for 4 years. Yes, I think that's how it broke down. One particular area where additional funding and staffing would be very beneficial is tackling biphenyls or Pcbs, which have been linked to cancer, immune effects, and other health harms. Around 1/3 of all school-aged children may be exposed to Pcbs through their school environments, with more children likely being exposed through daycare and other facilities, which is why I introduced the Get Toxic Substances Out of Schools Act. Dr. Friedhoff, would additional budgetary support help your work with states or local educational agencies to better understand and work on the risks that toxic Pcbs pose to children?
Thanks very much for that question. And that's an issue that comes up repeatedly whenever I talk to the regional staff, because they're in the position of hearing from schools in some cases where, the lighting fixtures are so old that the Pcbs are literally dripping out of them and exposing people. And the schools often lack the technical expertise that they need to be able to address and mitigate the problem. So in the 23 budget request, we do have a modest amount of money that's designed to augment those efforts in the states.
Yeah, and as Dr. Friedhoff knows, back in 1979, a woman, Ann Anderson, came into my office with her 3-year-old boy, Jimmy, who had leukemia. And she was in Woburn, Massachusetts, and everyone was ignoring her. And ultimately, it became a movie, A Civil Action, with John Travolta playing the lawyer. But in fact, it was Ann Anderson and the mothers who were the heroes. That's who the movie should have been about. And they identified the TCE that was ultimately the cause for those cancers and all of those children. And Superfund was largely driven by that Woburn and by Love Canal in terms of it going on the books in 1980. And so we're still now trying to deal with the funding issues. How are we going to provide for the protections for these devastating cancers so that more children aren't exposed to them? The Trump administration undermined the EPA risk determination of TCE by refusing to look at all the negative health effects of pregnant women and children. So Dr. Friedhoff, how is your office working to protect families from the dangers of TCE?
I really appreciate you asking me that question, because of all the chemicals that we're writing rules for under Tosca, TCE is the one that feels the most personal to me, and that's because of my work for you. And so he already told you some of the history of Ann Anderson with her little boy Jimmy, and I was re-reviewing that case, that whole story a few months ago in preparation for an agency meeting on TCE, and I tell you, I was blown away to realize that Jimmy Anderson would have been just about exactly my age had he not died when he was 12 years old. And in the 4 decades since he died, we've managed to regulate TCE under the Clean Air Act. We've managed to regulate it under the Safe Drinking Water Act. We've managed to regulate it under the Superfund law, but we have yet to regulate its manufacturing use under Tosca. And if there's one thing that drives me every day in this job, it's knowing how important it is to get that rule on the books.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. And again, there was always a lot of denial in the chemical industry on that issue. And by the way, it was one of the first Superfund cleanup sites, and now it's called the Jimmy Anderson Transportation Center. So it's where we built an incredible industrial and commercial and transportation center up there, named after that little boy. And if you could just briefly touch on asbestos. You know, we fought hard in 2016 to have asbestos included in that Tosca rewrite bill. And it was, you know, with the great hope that we would be able to see enormous progress made on asbestos and ultimately to see it banned. A lot of the countries in the rest of the world have done so. So can you talk about the progress you're making on that issue and what additional resources you might need in order to accomplish that goal?
Absolutely. Thanks very much for that. So asbestos, symbolically enough, was the very first rule that we proposed that came from the risk evaluations under the new Tosca program. We did propose a ban on the ongoing uses of chrysotile asbestos. We're taking comments on that proposal now, and we'll be looking to finalize it sometime in 2023. But as you might remember, the last administration chose to exclude other fiber types of asbestos, as well as legacy uses of asbestos, from that risk evaluation. A court found that the agency had improperly excluded those uses and types. And so we're doing a second part of the risk evaluation as a result, and that'll be done by December of 2024.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, yeah, and that issue was personal to me as well. My staff director, Joe Zampatella, his father was the head of the asbestos workers in Massachusetts in the 1970s and 80s. And I only had 2 unions endorse me in my first race, the asbestos workers and the teachers, when I ran for Congress. And ultimately, Mr. Zampatella passed away in 1986 from asbestos. And one of the most powerful images I can ever remember is an entire church filled with asbestos workers, all sitting there, row after row after row after row, because he was the leader of the union, and he had asbestosis, and he had just passed away. And for so many of them, they realized that would be their fate as well, because there had been no protections that had been put on the books. And so we just have an obligation to finish this job on asbestos, and I thank you, Dr. Friedhoff, so much for all of your great work on that.
Senator Walker, thank you so much for joining us. I think next in line of questioning is Senator Kelly. I believe he's going to be followed by Senator Whitehouse and Senator Sullivan. I think that's the order it is. Is that correct?
I would have thought.
No?
Am I up?
Senator Kelly, I think you're up. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Friedhoff, thank you for being here today. And I want to begin by discussing the latest drinking water advisory level for Pfas chemicals and how that impacts the work done by your office to develop national strategies for PFAS testing and tracking PFAS, which are still in use. So as you know, last week, EPA updated the lifetime health advisories for 2 of the most pervasive PFAS chemicals, PFOA and Pfas, from 70 parts per trillion to 4 parts per quadrillion for PFOA and 20 parts per quadrillion for Pfas. These updated guidelines are significant for the more than 20 communities in Arizona which have recorded levels of PFAS at or above these levels. And as I understand it, so we don't have testing technology which can detect PFAS in quadrillions yet, meaning many more communities could also be vulnerable, more than the 20 in Arizona. So Dr. Friedhoff, I understand that your office is responsible for developing a national strategy to test for PFAS. How do the new lifetime health advisories affect that work?
Well, thanks very much for that question, Senator Kelly. I think, so our testing strategy is really about the thousands of PFAS that we don't know enough about to write health advisories or regulate in some way. Because, as you know, there were thousands that were allowed into commerce over, or historically made or used in this country. And if we try to study them one by one by one by one, we'll never get the answers that we need in order to take action on the ones that need action taken on. So what we did was we divided those thousands of PFAS into categories based on their structure and other chemical properties, looked at the categories for which we had no health information, because that's clearly the most important question, is what does this type of PFAS do to your body if you're exposed? And we're designing a testing strategy designed to fill in those data gaps. So our first test order went out a couple weeks ago. It was for a PFAS that's found in firefighting foam and other products. And when we get the data back for that chemical, it will help us understand more about the human health effects of 500 other PFAS that are similar to it. So I think there's not exactly a connection between the health advisories and our testing strategy, but our testing strategy is designed to fill in the holes on human health data that exist for so many PFAS.
And are you confident you're going to be able to develop the tests necessary to detect in the quadrillions?
We're not testing that way. What we're doing is we're using our authority under Tosca to tell companies to give us information and data about the chemical. So sometimes it's doing modeling to show us what its effect would be. Other times it might be animal testing if we need to pursue animal testing. Other times it's information about whether the chemical dissolves in water and would therefore be likely to be in drinking water.
So then my understanding is, as we test drinking water, we're still going to be testing in the parts per trillion. And the only way we're going to know if somebody is exceeding the lifetime health limit in the quadrillions will be on the data you get from companies that manufacture these chemicals.
I think it's a slightly different question.
Okay.
I think sort of taking a step back, I think EPA has historically written a couple hundred different health advisories for drinking water over the years, and for information on these particular ones, I would say that the Office of Water probably has more answers than I have. But I think maybe one way to think about it is to think about the lead rules, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's generally accepted that there's no safe level of lead. And so the goal for lead in drinking water is 0.
Yeah, I got you.
But the rules are what factor in the detection levels, like how to detect it and how to treat it and how to remove it. And I think that's what you'll see. I think that is sort of the difference between a health advisory for PFAS and a rule for PFAS.
I got it. And I'm going to have my office follow up with yours on this to make sure that, because these 20 communities, we know that the level is above what you just set the lifetime health advisory for. So we need to figure out, how are we going to clean up this water? The drought situation we're facing in Arizona right now is so critical that at some point here in the near future, some communities are going to be relying on groundwater. We're going to make sure that water's clean. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. And now, live from the great state of Alaska.
Oh, thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Sullivan.
Chairman. Thank you very much. Dr. Friedhoff, I want to just begin by commenting, you have a lot of experience with this committee, correct?
Yeah.
And Tosca.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to begin by complimenting the chairman and the committee's culture here of getting things done, big things done, big important pieces of legislation. I've been on this committee since I first came to the Senate over 7 years ago, and we have our debates and we have our disagreements, but we managed to actually produce legislation like Tosca. This is the first committee that Senator Whitehouse and I started our series of Save Our Seas Act legislation, which are very important laws, and the infrastructure bill. And there's a lot that's happened in this committee that I think benefits the country and shows our fellow Americans that the Senate can work in a bipartisan way. So with that, the Tosca bill was actually one of the first major pieces of legislation that I worked on as a new senator in 2015, and I know that you were a part of that. I think it was a really good effort, and but one thing that I'm concerned about now is I worry that it might be in line to be subject to abuse. And let me give you a little bit of context. The Biden administration is encouraging agencies that have no legislative mandate to regulate the energy sector, choke off capital to the energy sector, whether it's the Federal Reserve, for goodness sakes, whether it's the SEC. The chairman of the SEC put out a 800-page rule all about climate change, of which, and he committed to me during his confirmation process he wasn't going to do that. He's doing it. Comptroller of the Currency, who was nominated by this president, said she wanted to put oil and gas businesses out of business. Comptroller of Currency, what the heck does she have to do with? So you have this major power grab, and of course this is contributing to $6 gallon gas, which is crushing working families in America and Alaska, in West Virginia. So I was concerned to read about one of these extreme far-left groups that just petitioned the EPA to use Tosca as a way to phase out fossil fuel production, use, and disposal. Now, you and I worked on Tosca together. We all worked on Tosca together. I was involved. But I'm pretty darn sure that I would have noticed a provision that somehow gave EPA authority to do something like that. An article called this group's filing to the EPA novel approach to Tosca. That's a nice way of saying that Tosca did not give the EPA the authority to try to phase out fossil fuel production. Can you just definitively agree with me on that, saying that no, Tosca was not focused on that. We're not going to let that law, bipartisan law, be abused in ways that other federal agencies and the Biden administration are abusing their power to try to shut down American energy, which hurts our national security, hurts working families, drives up gas prices at the pump. Can you agree, could you agree with me on that? You helped write this law. You did a great job. This committee did a great job. But this committee did not contemplate using Tosca to phase out energy production in America. Do you agree with that?
I do agree that the purpose of Tosca was not to phase out energy production in America.
And will you look at the petition, I forget which radical group filed it, with the discerning statutory authority of the EPA, which was not intended, you helped draft it, we all worked on it together, was not intended to do that. Novel or not novel, would you agree with me on that as well?
I think I'll just sort of take a step back, say, first of all, we just received the petition, haven't reviewed it, have an obligation to review it, and have an obligation to respond. So we will do that. I'll also say that we do, as an administration, believe that climate change is an urgent threat. So, but when we wrote...
Well, was Tosca really focused on climate change? It wasn't.
Climate change was not debated when we negotiated Tosca.
Correct.
That's absolutely the case.
Okay.
What Tosca did say, though, was that for all the chemicals that are in commerce, EPA was supposed to study them all and put regulations in place when EPA found risk.
Well, let me just, I know I'm out of time and I don't want to abuse this, but these kind of backdoor regs, particularly when we all worked on it, we know that that's not what Tosca was meant to do. If you have a novel approach, you have the President of the United States quoted recently, he's all over the map, but we want to lower gas prices, we need to have more oil supply right now. Geez, okay. That's different from what he said as a candidate, but I'll take him at face value. But I think this is a test, you know, from this White House. If they accept this petition as another federal agency overreach to choke off capital to the American energy sector, and then have the president say, oh, no, we're trying to help the American energy sector. No one's believing it. And this is going to be another test case. So I hope that you can read the statute with fidelity to what we agreed to here in this committee in a good bipartisan way, but it wasn't meant to regulate the energy sector. By the way, neither is the SEC statutory authority. That chairman is way over his skis. You're hurting it. This administration is hurting the energy sector, hurting American families, but I just hope you of all people take a hard look, because you know what this statute was about, and it wasn't about the regulation of the American energy sector, and I hope you reject this petition. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Senator Whitehouse, welcome.
Thanks very much. I am extremely fond of my colleague, Senator Sullivan, and we work very, very well together on a lot of areas, but I've just got to offer some opposing views with regarding some of the stuff that he
I am
said.
shocked, Mr. Chairman.
For starters,
I am shocked.
when he talks about the American energy sector, he's talking about America's fossil fuel sector. If you look at America's energy sector, the Biden administration is working very hard to grow as fast as we can the renewable energy that we need for the future, because climate change is an actual thing and the transition has to actually happen. I know that there are a lot of people, and particularly the industry, doesn't want climate change discussed by financial regulators, but for Pete's sake, every major central bank has sent out financial warnings about what climate change is going to do. Freddie Mac has warned of coastal property values crash cascading through the economy worse than 2008. We have the major corporate folks, most recently Deloitte, coming out with a report talking about a multi-trillion-dollar swing between getting it right on climate and getting it wrong on climate. So the fact that financial regulators are paying attention to this shows nothing more than that they're paying attention. Of course they're paying attention to this. And as for the petition being filed by extreme environmental groups, the guy's name is Hansen. He was the top scientist for NASA. NASA got stuff driving around on the surface of Mars. Their scientists are actually pretty good at stuff. And his testimony first came out in this room with a Republican senator chairing it, John Chafee of Rhode Island, so I take this a little bit personally, and facts have proven his testimony in this room all those years ago extremely, extremely accurate. So there's my counterpoint to my friend Dan Sullivan's point. Now, with respect to Tosca and paying for it, we gave EPA authority to levy fees to target that 25% of the program would be covered by industry contributions. What percentage is now covered by user fees?
Far less than that, actually, Senator. And the fees rule was one of those implementation challenges that I'm hoping we can course correct on, because the first fees rule didn't kick in until fiscal year 2019. It actually excluded all of the costs of the first 10 risk evaluations, which was the most expensive thing the agency was working on Tosca at that time. And as a result, it only collected about 12 or 13% of our costs, not the 25% that Congress expected and that every stakeholder supported. So in the 2022 appropriations bill, Congress directed us to write a fees rule that reflect the actual costs of implementing Tosca, and that is what we're planning on doing.
Okay, where are you in that process? Where are you with redoing
We
that?
are close to being able to send a supplemental proposed rule to OMB in the next couple of months. There was a proposed rule that went out towards the end of the last administration, but it exempted the costs of rulemaking. So it needs to be supplemented in order to do what it was intended to do.
So you think it'll get to OMB by when?
I think it'll get to OMB sometime this summer or fall,
Okay.
and hoping for it to be finalized before fiscal year 24.
Okay, good. Well, I've used a good deal of my time on my
It was time well used. Go ahead.
with Senator Sullivan, but I would, remind the committee that, there are a lot of people who don't seem to take climate change seriously, but for me and for Chairman Carper, who come from coastal states and not very big ones, we're looking at actual projections supported by federal and state government that are unrebutted, that we're going to have multiple feet of sea level rise along our shores. We've got maps that show that people who live on Warwick Neck in Rhode Island are going to be living on Warwick Neck Island soon. that people who live in Bristol are going to be living in Bristol Island soon. We have major thoroughfares that are going to be flooded out, which are also the escape routes from flooding. So we have enormous, enormous risks and challenges ahead of us. We have enormous expenditures. And all you have to do is read the newspaper, whether it's wildfires or droughts or lost water out west or massive flooding. Things have gone haywire in the Earth's operating systems, and we know why. And to pretend that it doesn't have something to do with burning fossil fuels is just simply fictional, magical thinking. And so we have to address it, and I hope we will. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining, Sheldon. Senator Capito, I have some more questions. Would you like to go first?
Yeah. Thank you. I would love that. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, I think you addressed this when you talked about the how you're going to handle the PFAS issue. But I was wondering, do you intend to utilize a tiered approach? I think you said you would, to classifying PFAS by categorizing and prioritizing them based on different physical properties and hazards? Is that your intention?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And I think that some of the confusion that we hear today is your office's role with PFAS as opposed to the health advisory that came out from the water office. And this, to me, is having had PFAS in our water systems and shut down our local water systems overnight. The risk assessments and the risk communications are so extremely important. And so I am concerned that when you have one office from the EPA setting an advisory level, what does advisory mean to people? It means that if you're in that area, that it's unsafe, and they're planning to come out with a safe drinking level water, which is going to be higher than the advisory level. So, I mean, I know this is not your problem, but it is your problem because it is a chemical. And I don't know, how do you message that to people when you're trying to tell them what's safe and what isn't?
I think you're absolutely right that risk communication is important. And as a science-based agency, we often speak scientifically and don't do as much work as we should, speaking for my part of the agency, at sort of translating into words that people can really understand and access. I think, though, on the drinking water side, it's not that different from the lead rules, right? Because the maximum contaminant level goal for lead is 0, because it's generally accepted that there's no safe level of lead. The rules do factor in detection limits and treatment techniques and other things that present realistic, or represent barriers to actually getting to 0. And I feel like the agency managed that risk communication well, and I have confidence that the agency can also succeed in the PFAS space.
Okay, I'm concerned because obviously what Senator Kelly was getting to is on the health advisory level, we can't measure that low. And so how do you know? You don't. Yeah. Let me ask you about the PPE, because I mentioned it in my statement with OSHA. And I think there's some concern that you're drifting into OSHA regulations where making assumptions that people aren't wearing PPE, so a chemical may not be safe in a water, but if they're fully gowned up and have protective equipment, it's safe to be in and around. How do you, why are you making assumptions that workers are not wearing their PPE? Is that, and isn't that OSHA's job rather than yours? And we've already discussed that your deadlines are last, so let's stay in our lane, I guess, is my message.
I appreciate the question. So first of all, the law tells us to look at potentially exposed and susceptible subpopulations, and that clearly has to include workers. And while we're in extremely close contact with OSHA and NIOSH and are coordinating with them really well, we can't just assume that OSHA will work for everyone. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that OSHA rules don't apply to everybody. They don't apply to self-employed workers, and they don't apply to public sector workers who live in a state that doesn't have an OSHA-approved plan. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is when you actually go on OSHA's website for the chemical-specific standards that they write, the very first sentence of that website says that they're outdated and inadequate for protecting worker health because they were written in the 1970s. And the last reason is, when you look at OSHA's top 10 most frequent safety violations, which a list that they put out every single year you see respirator, eye, and skin protection safety standards as among those top 10 most frequent violations. So we can't just assume that OSHA is enough, and we can't just assume that OSHA is used and followed by everybody. But this is where that risk communication point you just made is so important, because we know that a lot of companies, especially the larger manufacturers, go beyond what OSHA requires them to do when they're looking out for their workers, and we know that. And I think it's incumbent on the agency to make sure to communicate that when we write our risk evaluations so that people aren't unduly afraid of an absence of a safety measure that is actually there at their facility where they work. So that's something that we do plan to do. And as we move towards risk management, I think what we're striving for is consistency with OSHA rules when OSHA rules are enough, consistency with best industry practices when best industry practices are enough, and to basically level the playing field and make sure that everyone is protected no matter who they work for or where they live.
I mean, I think the goal of that, obviously, is what Tosca is about. But we have other agencies. I mean, my concern is to get to your core functions and to meet those obligations that are outlined very specifically in the law, and that you have additional, whether it's OSHA or somebody else, clean water, clean air, whatever. Entities that are tangential to Tosca, important. I just am concerned about, as the mission creep, or if you take on too much, you're not going to get anything done. And so I just put that on your table, and I appreciate everything. You've been very candid in your answers, and I appreciate your service. You're doing a good job. Thank you.
I have a few more questions, if your schedule allows. When I ran out of time for my question and yield to Senator Capito, we were talking about resources, which you've been talking about literally all morning. And I want to come back to this just for a minute. And the question is regarding the fiscal year 2023 budget. And my question is pretty straightforward. Will the funding and the personnel that are included in the fiscal year 2023 budget take care of the entire challenge of the problems that you face in doing your job, or is this a down payment that will take several years?
I think in order for the program to work sustainably, it will need a sustainable investment of resources. It will need an updated fees rule, and it will need us to work on modernizing our approaches and streamlining them when we can so that we can make the costs of our work go down using the lessons we've learned over the past 6 years.
Okay. With respect to workforce, I suspect Senator Capito's experienced the same thing. I like to do customer calls in Delaware. A lot of them are to businesses. And now that we've opened back up for business here, we have a lot of folks who want to come and meet with us. Just before I came to this hearing, had a significant business, American business, that came in and talked about how they're doing, what their challenges are. And they said, workforce. They just can't find folks that with the kind of training, the interest, and the will, the ability to do the jobs that they need to fill. And I hear that all over the country, all over the country. And I'm sure it's something that you face. Talk a little bit about the expertise that you're looking for to meet your ability to do your job. Talk about the skills that you're looking for and that maybe finding hardest to fill. Is there anything? Is there something that we need to be doing about the hiring process that exists? We're trying. I think we have a situation with the IRS. That they took them forever to hire people. And some good work has been done, and that's been addressed at least in part. but we need to focus on this, and what can we do? What are the needs, the expertise? What are you looking for, and how are you trying to find it? What can we do to help?
Appreciate the question. It is daunting to think about staffing up so quickly. We are putting together a pretty aggressive recruitment strategy, particularly for new chemicals, because we really want, we don't just want, a handful of toxicologists now. We want to build relationships with universities so that we have a steady stream of people that we can draw from to perform that role, because it can be a pretty specialized role. I also think the Title 42 authority that Congress provided the agency with, which lets us hire a small number of much more senior scientists in a much more streamlined hiring process, is actually going to be really helpful to the agency moving forward. But I agree with you. We will need to really work hard to tell people how exciting an opportunity it is to come and work on a new law that has barely scratched the surface of its potential. And I think that'll be appealing to a lot of the nation's younger scientists and engineers.
Mm-hmm. When I talk to people, a lot of times I'll ask them, so at some point in our conversation, when they're talking about what they do for a living and their careers and all, and I'll ask them, what gives you joy in your work? That's what I ask them, what gives you joy in your work? And a lot of times what I hear from people basically is they like helping people. They like helping people. I think there's a great opportunity for folks who work with you, for you, to help people, not just to help make sure that that we're looking out for folks on their families on the safety side, but also to make sure that we're providing economic opportunity and job creation on the economy side. The the world has changed a lot since I was graduating from school and going off to be in the Navy in the Vietnam War. But I'm convinced that there is a generation of young people coming out of high school, colleges, and so forth these days that want to help people. And if they had some idea that they could do it through an endeavor that really the endeavor you're leading, I think they'd want to do that. I would just urge you to find ways to communicate that clearly. Maybe ask most people in college, how would you like to work on Tosca? They haven't a clue. Yep. And so I think there's something to be said for being able to message better. Is the expertise that you need, is it out there?
It's out there. It's out there. I think there's people graduating from college, every year with, amazing education in environmental science and toxicology, in ecology. I mean, I really do think the workforce is there, and I agree with you. I mean, the people at EPA are incredibly excited and committed to the mission of the agency, and really, do get excited by the opportunity to help people, as you said.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about good science, and perhaps a good example is your decision to consider risks of a chemical broadly, rather than consider the so-called conditions of use. When you assess the risk of a chemical, as I understand it, the conditions of use refer to the processes or protections that companies might use to minimize releases and exposure to the chemical. I believe you would assert that the decision to consider risk broadly is the scientifically sound way to proceed. I believe that. I may be mistaken there, but I understand the industry feels that good science dictate that you consider conditions of use in these risk evaluations. Question, would you help us understand this disagreement over how science should be used to assess chemical risk?
Absolutely. So the law does say study the chemical substance over its conditions of use, and the risk evaluations do look at the risk attached to each condition of use, and they analyze that risk, and we're going to continue to do that. I think where industry is not in full agreement with our approach is they think that when we say that an entire chemical substance poses unreasonable risk, they think that's unfair because they think that there's some risks there's some conditions of use that are not risky at all, there's some conditions of use that are very risky, and there's some conditions of use that are less risky, and they want to and they want everyone to know which those are. We agree with them on that, and we're going to continue to tell people which of the uses are more risky than others and which are the ones that are most likely to be regulated. But I do think that people have the ability to sort of understand the agency's process. It's kind of like Americans know how much junk food is too much. They know how much medicine is too much. They know how much sun is too much and when it's time to put sunscreen on. And ultimately, what our risk evaluations are saying to people is how much of a chemical is too much and what are the ways that chemical is used that are too risky. And then when we get to rules, what we want is for the public to trust that we've evaluated the risks, that we've properly addressed them, and our rule says to people, this is how this chemical can be used safely. And I think that's on us to communicate properly, and we do plan on doing a better job in this regard, and also would absolutely welcome industry's feedback when they think we've missed the mark on the communications front.
Okay. One of the things that gives me joy is working with my colleagues across the aisle to take on challenging issues and to get input from all different kind of directions, all different quarters, and being able to enact meaningful legislation, thoughtful legislation. And as you'll recall, I was so proud of this committee and the Congress and the administration at the time for our ability to collaborate and with industry and with the folks at EPA in order to enact legislation. Very proud, high moment in the years that I've been here. I am just, as we sit here today, 6 years later, and see how that the dream, the hope that we had is not being realized. It's just deeply troubling to me. I know it is to my colleagues. And this has not been a committee, this has not been a hearing, it's not our nature to cast aspersions at you, or the folks that you lead, and the folks at EPA. But we've got to do better. Like I like to say, and Senator Capito has heard me say more often than she wants, everything I do, I know I can do better. Everything I do, I know I can do better. This is a shared responsibility. One of a member of our staff likes to say, teamwork makes the dream work. And I think there's a lot of good intention here to get this right, And we need to. A lot of people are counting on us, and we need to get it right. And with that, I want to thank you, Dr. Friedhoff. Thank you for sharing your experience and your expertise with us today. Thank you for all that you did to help make this legislation a law in our country and to try to enact it. There is surely no road to success without a full understanding of the challenges that you face in implementing a critical federal law. This is not easy. This is hard. And the implications couldn't be greater. They include the health of our families, the health of our communities, and include our environment. And our ability to tap novel chemistries to hasten our transition to a more stable climate, to obtain medical breakthroughs, and hopefully someday a litter-free circular economy. I look forward to much help across the dais, and I think I've heard from my colleagues here that there's a strong interest in doing that, and help throughout the Senate to ensure that you get the resources that you and your colleagues need to succeed and to help all of us succeed. With that, a little bit of housekeeping. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record materials that relate to today's hearing. Hearing no objections, so approved. Senators will be allowed to submit written questions for the record through the close of business on Wednesday, July 6, 2022. We'll compile those questions, send them to our witness, and ask Dr. Friedhoff to reply by Wednesday, July 20th of this year, if you would. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you again so much. Thank you.